Okay, I'd like to call the Monday, September 12th, 2011 meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission to order. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone, members of the public. We're expecting, I think, that Carolina will be here, but we'll have to soldier on without her for now. So the first item is the agenda review. You can see that other than our regular parts of business, we're going to spend 60 minutes. We're planning on talking about the flooding and the town plan and that sort of thing. And then we're going to discuss the commercial land use report from Hawk Planning Resources, and hopefully everybody has that with them. So that's basically what we're going to do tonight. We won't go past 25 after 8 tonight, is the plan. So, so the first order of business, or the next order of business, is to approve the minutes of August 22nd, 2011. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A second? Second. Any discussion? I would say that Julia got all the hits and the highlights in here, for sure. There was a lot of discussion that night, and as you may recall, we went until 9 o'clock that night, so so hearing no other discussion, all those in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. The next order of business is to make announcements, and I forgot to bring something that I got. It was about the announcement about flood stuff. And it's a meeting in October.
Oh.
It's a one-day meeting up north.
Yeah, the September 7th or whatever. I saw it.
It's October. I think I have it in the office. I can grab it. There's a green one I placed in front of you.
Oh,
If you
okay.
could do that, and I'll forget.
Would you make me a copy too, please?
Yeah.
Copy.
The one I'm thinking about is in October, Sue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the announcement that Sue asked me to make is for all of us and for those in our vast audience, keep hazardous materials and debris out of the hazardous materials out of the flood debris. And there's a list of banned items that should be separated from the trash that has resulted from the flood. Hazardous waste, sharps, needles and blades and things, car batteries and rechargeable batteries, electronics, mercury products, that is from fluorescent bulbs, thermostats, and thermometers, excuse me, motor oil and filters, antifreeze, transmission fluid, and gasoline, oil-based paint, stain, varnish, paint thinner, stripper, and then it says dry or hardened latex paint can be disposed of with trash, propane cylinders and other gas cylinders, tires, white goods, that is refrigerators, freezers, stoves, washers, dryers, and dishwashers. All of those materials, rather than being put in the trash, can be dropped off at the Wyndham Wyndham Solid Waste District's Convenience Center at Old Ferry Road, Monday through Friday 8 to 3, Saturday 8 till noon. Special note, for disposal of explosives, ammo, flares, fireworks, etc., contact your local fire department. So be safe. And it is a good thing for everybody to keep in mind. I know there's been stuff in the paper about this, but even just cleaning up the dirt and dust and mud, there's stuff in there that you don't want to breathe in and so forth. So wear a mask, wear 2 masks.
Actually, there's a website that people should be encouraged to go to, which has advice on.
Do you know what it is?
I'm trying to remember it.
There's a few different
Wyndham
ones.
status.
Wyndham status. Yeah.
Wyndham status?
At WordPress.com. No,
No,
Wyndham
Wyndham
status.
status.wordpress.com.
Yeah, let me write it up here. On
Vermont Response also has links to that site.
Yeah.
And a second announcement is that there will be a workshop for local officials involved in planning and development review, municipal work, and flood hazard management and relief services. And it's all about flood damage mitigation, road and bridge standards, stormwater management, shoreland protection, lake and river flooding, and the governor's flood initiative. And it's a lot of things that we have spent many happy hours talking about here. And sounds like it'll be a really interesting workshop. It's put on by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It is on Wednesday, October 19th. It's in Montpelier, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Did it say that someplace?
Sure.
Is anyone from here going?
What is it? I might go.
It's in Montpelier,
I would-
and
I would say we're
about
likely
a
to go.
6-hour event. And we've done before, if people go to these sorts of things, that the town pays for us.
Sometimes.
Okay, maybe maybe it is that the town doesn't pay on our behalf.
We need to talk about, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But it would be good to get, if people are interested in going, we should
Yeah.
get a sense of how many are going to go.
Okay. So it's very pertinent to, a lot of the.
What was the date again?
It's October 19th, which is a Wednesday. Registration starts at 8:30 a.m. It ends at 3. Light breakfast and lunch are included.
I'll forward the information.
There's an
We
email.
already got it from
You did.
the cities and towns.
Okay, so keep, let Sue know, anybody that's interested, and we'll try to go together if we have a few people going. Okay, any other announcements?
Yes.
Anybody has?
I do.
Yes.
First, because Carolina isn't here, I thought we should mention that there was a volunteer planting at Exit 1 based on the meetings that Martha organized based on the Canal Street Planning Initiative. And the volunteers really did a lot of work to clear with V-Trans the planting, and they got dirt and
Manure.
manure and plants, and we planted, and they cleaned up the woods and the weeds, and the hospital planted in that center island as well, so it looks pretty nice.
Oh, great, and it's that area when you come off the exit, right straight ahead, is it? Or?
Yeah.
And to the
Yeah.
side.
Into the side?
And to the side there, right?
And they-
When you hit the stop sign, if you look to the right, it's the triangle right there where the sign is,
Uh-huh.
and just to the right there where the other directional sign
Oh,
is.
great, great.
And they weeded all in the planting at the outlet center.
Uh-huh.
And the other announcement is that I went to the Northern New England chapter of the American Planning Association conference. And it was a really nice conference in Burlington on Thursday and Friday. And I would encourage our planners and our board commission members to go next time they'd like. I thought it was good, got us out of our planning rut. And there were a lot of things that they said about the master plan that I thought were relevant, and specifically that if there's values that the town wants to protect, they should be specifically mentioned and identified in the plan, such as views and so forth, because they said, for example, the town of Stowe has a viewshed map, and if there are developers who wanted to have wind farms and so forth, the town plan has a weight that people will review and identify if there's an area that's already spoken for as a valuable visual resource. They also, the head of the Orton Family Foundation spoke. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they gave a lot of planning grants to New England communities to do some planning work. And also they mentioned the same census trends that we heard for Brattleboro, that they're going to be more older and single households in the coming years. And there were some elements about ethics and the public interest that were really helpful for boards. And I don't know whether the commission has an ethics statement, but the Planning Association has one, and we might want to discuss that at some point.
Okay, great.
I have another.
Okay, Jim?
I'm not sure if it would count as an announcement or where it belongs, but in last week's minutes here, it says that there was going to be a report to the select board to categorize a list and send to the planning commission to discuss tonight. Is that coming?
It's coming, but we had a meeting to plan for tonight's meeting last week, and decided that some things are getting pushed.
That's coming, but it's not coming tonight.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that, because there was that and something else.
A couple things in the minutes.
Yeah, a couple of work on a couple of chapters that
That we pushed off.
they've been kind of busy
Okay.
with other stuff. So,
Yep.
yeah. And any other announcements? I would announce that there's a documentary showing called Vision Quest at the All Souls Universalist Unitarian. That's the West Village Meeting House. Tomorrow at 6:30 with refreshments. And that's all the announcements we've got.
I would add to yours that was produced by Catherine Turnus and Roland Boyden. That's Catherine Turnus, and Roland Boyden is upstairs doing his news show.
All right, great, thank you. Any other announcements? Okay, well, why don't we go to then other business, which I don't know, did you guys have any other business?
Not yet.
No, it just
Okay.
got dropped off the agenda for a while, and then when we needed it, so it's just back on,
Okay,
placeholder.
that's, I guess, an announcement. Other business is back on the agenda.
Oh my God.
Pretty
Oh, we should
exciting.
stop doing this.
So the next item is public comment, and we do have some members of the public here. As usual, if any members of the public have comment about things other than the discussions that we're going to have, the two discussions that we're going to have, this is a great time to bring it up. If you have things to say about our discussion of the town plan and the recent floods and commercial land use report, then we should save them for that. But any takers? Okay, thank you. So why don't we jump right into Irene and the town plan?
Okay, what I'm going to do is actually kill the lights a little bit so that you can see this a bit better. free to move around so that you can actually see. I wasn't going to make any assumptions about how much people had seen. I know it's been on television and on the web and on a lot of different places. I took some photos partly for reasons to do with forming kind of a photographic record of the event. But there's not a whole lot of human interest in here directly. It's a fairly dull series of photos about things falling down. But what I wanted to focus on was some of the issues that we'll need to address once we hit that list. And I wanted to go through it fairly quickly at first, and then if people want to go back to the photos and use it as a prompt or something when we're having the discussion of that list of items that we've provided in the memo, then that'd be great. So this is on Sunset Lake Road, not too far from the intersection of Route 9.
The bridge?
Yeah, it's the first bridge.
Right.
What you see here is, if you pay particular attention...
Is that what's called bridge number 7?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay.
So this whole section here is roadway that's dropped and failing, and this is not by any means the most significant failing, but it's an example of the kind of impact on minor roads. So again, this is a town road. This is not a state highway. Some of the damage that we see here will be covered by FEMA payments and other sources, but there's a large amount of this kind of work that the town confronts. So the next one is almost over the road on the same bridge, and what you'll notice is the stream doing a couple of things here actually. It's accessing obviously at the full height of the flood, the stream was accessing this area here, which is part of the floodplain. You'll notice that the house located here is on the other side of the brook, but also is still in the floodplain. That's actually, I think, technically in the floodway.
Where is that? Is that Meadowbrook Road?
No, it's Sunset Lake.
Oh, Sunset Lake up
Yep.
there? Yeah.
Yep.
Right across from where that bridge was?
This house received serious damage as a consequence of the flood. This is further along Route 9. What you see here is the brook taking a new course, this is just before the Whetstone and the Halliday kind of join at the trailer park. This is at a major bridge across Route 9 that also suffered serious impact.
That's right where we were going to have storage.
Right, and then you'll see the gravel. Some of these stones in the foreground are 18 inches across, so they've been moved there by the force of the flood. You'll see the substantial erosion in front of the house. That was their driveway, and the driveway is cut off from Route 9 at this point by a temporary kind of culvert. This is just to the east of that shot. In the foreground here, this murky, dark olive water is the water running out of the culvert and joining the Whetstone.
That's where it crosses and goes out behind Cumberland Farms and then ties in with the Whetstone out behind there, right?
No, you can see, this is just west of, if you've got really good eyesight, you can pick up.
Just west of Cumberland Farms.
It's almost over the road from Cumberland Farms. Just hang on, Joe. You can see the Shell sign in the distance.
Right.
Up here. This is the Fleming Oil,
Right.
Shell gas station, with the Dunkin' Donuts right here. So
And,
this is just.
and where's the road though, Rod? Is it?
Oh,
is
the
the
road.
left.
The road
To
is
the
over
left.
over to the left.
So we're on that
Yes,
side. Of
where
the
I'm
road.
I
Okay.
standing-
see the guardrails up there if you look.
Oh, yeah.
I'm standing on what was the driveway to that house
Yeah.
that you just saw in a previous
right,
shot.
Right.
All
Did
right.
all those boulders get loosened up by the storm?
Um,
Or deposited there by the storm?
I think you're looking at a combination. If you pay careful attention here, this is not the work of nature. This is the work of men and machines, people and machines. And so I think that this is emergency riprap. This large stuff here. Can people see my cursor when I move that around? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been added as
Since the flood?
since
Oh, wow.
to shore up the road. This is a detention basin just east of Cumberland Farms, and there's Fleming over the road. And it shows in the foreground still a large deposit of silt. There's still standing water here of a substantial amount. This stretches out and back to the brook behind the gas station.
How long ago were these taken?
Saturday morning.
Yeah, just
Okay,
the other
so 5-6 days after the flood, or after
2
the
weeks.
rain.
A week more.
2 weeks. I mean, there's been a
Oh,
heavy rain
2
event
weeks.
since, but this is 2 weeks.
Right. Okay.
So, Rod, is that an engineered and built detention basin?
Yep,
Yeah.
Yes, that was a requirement of their permit.
completely.
Saturday, just this past Saturday.
This is the front parking lot area of the mattress outlet store, and what you'll see here is the substantial sediment deposits indicating that the flood water breached the banks of the brook, which is some 200 feet to the left of this photo, and was washing over Route 9 at
It
this
breached
point.
Route 9 all the way down through there.
Yeah.
Literally, all the way down through the discount beverage. It was up
Yep.
to the stairs on that discount
Right.
beverage place there.
This is another photo indicating deposits and the impact to the front of the Leader Homes Centre. Again, you'll see the glinting water here. This has all been reconstructed as an emergency step along the edge of Route 9. You also notice that the RV park,
The RVs were shifted completely sideways. Down
Yeah.
in there under a canopy, there was a Toyota Prius upside down in one of the bottles.
yeah, it's now back up on its wheels, but
Right.
doesn't look so good.
I don't think you could drive it off.
I think the batteries might be wet.
Right, right.
Which is an interesting point about those, actually. They don't go so good after they've been wet.
Right. In Vermont RV, the standing water line was at least 3 feet above the floor.
Yes. This is a close-up of the amount of material lost on the edge of Route 9. This is a wayside fence here. This is 2.5 to 3 feet deep. You can see the fill that's here. This is continuing to break up and fold
Yes.
even today.
And they were in there today, in that hole
Yeah,
today.
right. Jim?
So, when it comes time to pay for this, is Route 9 a state road, so funding comes out of there and town roads come out of town, or is this not the time to have such a thought?
This is a state road, and in this section it's entirely under the control of the state. The town doesn't provide any maintenance for the stretch of Route 9. It's kind of a stretch by stretch question.
Okay.
So that's a good question.
Thanks.
I think that the state part breaks off at Edward
Okay.
Heights.
This is, let me see if I can just enlarge this a little bit. This is looking east from the bridge at Brookside, and what you see here is you can note substantial erosion of the bank on the, I guess, the northern side.
Route 9 side.
The Route 9 side, thank you. And you can see the sediment deposits left behind, which almost look like a trail, but it's actually sediment on the condo side. And just through this tree here, around about here, is where the condos actually begin. So they had a very good viewing location for the event. The bridge was completely covered in about 18 inches of sediment, load from the force of the flood. And as you'll see this is a close-up of the riprap that's been ripped away. So this was once a fairly heavily armoured bank along here. This is the old Caruso house in the background. And so this is all a floodway and a floodplain out to probably where the sunlight starts.
And you're standing on the bridge there, is that the edge of the bridge?
I'm standing on the bed of a truck on the bridge.
Yeah, okay. And Route 9 is to your left.
Yes, Route 9 is over here, through the trees, past the Caruso house.
Yeah.
Another shot of the same brook, showing the purpose of this is that it's much wider than it was and apparently shallower. I don't know I suspect this was deposited as a way of trying to protect the bridge abutment, which may or may not work. This house was turned up in several photos. You can see here,
Yeah.
my cursor marks the water line on the wall of the house.
That's
Cool.
Jonathan Chase's house.
That's
Yes.
right, that's Jonathan's house.
Right.
Holy cow.
Right. So, and you
His
see
house
this,
was an island, literally.
you see the sediment load in the front yard. This line marks the high water mark. This is
Well,
debris
where's the
at
fire?
the. You can see that it's been cut, but this is debris that's washed up at the farmers market. You can see here that this is the sharp turn that the brook makes at the back of the farmers market. On the other side of the land, this land over here is owned by the town. You'll notice that this whole slope here has failed dramatically, even compared to the way it was beforehand.
That's not near the corner where we went on our site visit before.
It's a little bit around from the corner.
Yeah.
Is that by the information booth?
No, I'm accessing this from the farmers market parcel that they bought recently.
Right. But across the river,
Oh,
there was
oh,
that
oh.
behind the information booth where you're pointing there? across the
No,
river?
this is more where the basketball courts and the senior citizen center is.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Right, so I'm facing the other way.
But not quite to that, right?
Right.
That's that
Right.
way a little.
But the point here is, apart from the number, see, this is the root ball here. So very large trees. This tree was about, it had a girth of kind of 2 feet, or 24 inches, and it had been uprooted, the whole thing in one piece, and deposited here. The brook is significantly wider than it was at this point, and there's a lot of deposition here and over here that wasn't so apparent before. There's another shot of the farmers market, again from the parcel that they own that's accessed from the
Covered bridge. or-
covered bridge side, the Memorial Park side, looking back across the farmers market, and that vehicle's making its way out to exit 9 at that point. Again, you see just the remnants, few large stones here that were once, armoring the bank to some extent. That's all that's left. The entire shape of this has been rearranged. You can see that still the remains of a huge sediment load, and then all this brush and so forth being pushed over completely. That was vertical a couple of weeks ago.
Rod, just for a second, if you go back 2
Yep.
pictures
Yep.
to that picture, just, some people were there that are here. I think this is your first meeting, right, James?
Yeah.
And when we were looking at fluvial erosion, that bank is, 30 feet high or something? I mean, not right there, but over
Back
a
up
little.
Well,
around
the
here.
basketball courts is pretty tall.
It's really high.
Yeah.
And you can't quite, I couldn't tell that, I think, from looking at
From
this
looking at that
picture,
image,
but
that's true, actually. This
probably-
distance here is probably close to 30 feet.
And it's probably the most dramatic example at that time of
Yes.
fluvial erosion, because it was very clear that that bank was getting undermined before, and that the basketball courts were going to wind up to be water polo courts after a while.
Yeah, I think we're a lot closer to that goal now than we were. So this is the area that, luckily, I guess, the farmers market folk planted with these trees in an effort to stabilize this whole area in the bank. You see the debris in the background here. You also see debris in the foreground. This whole pile here is just piled up debris that's been washed up, and a lot of sediment. There's an interesting series of kind of very shallow trenches with large stone in them. I'm not quite sure what the theory behind that is. It's too regularized to be something that the brook did. So there's one here, and there's one here, and another one behind that incredibly cute dog, but just turned up.
The river did move boulders in its fury.
Right.
I mean, you could hear them banging against each other.
Yes,
And
the noise is
so
deafening,
in many
apparently.
places, a lot of those big rocks may have come downriver
Right.
and been torn away from another place, because in front of my house, there's all new, a boulder field that was never
Right.
there before.
The new boulders that you're
That's right.
not familiar with. Right.
Now, and my familiar rock is gone. My pet rock. is
Yeah, I'd
there.
say someone in Holyoke would probably enjoy it right now.
Yes.
All right. So this is obviously 91. So this is William Street, and this shows the obvious. Well, actually, it shows a couple of things. I was taking a photo while driving, and I was stationary actually, but also
Wait, the light's red.
what's that?
Was that
That's
open
red,
again through
right?
there?
What's that?
Is that piece of road open?
No,
No, it
it's
didn't
very
look so.
unopen.
Yeah.
This is
there
further down, showing you the degree of impact that the brook had on William Street. I'm parked on the edge here. These are in the foreground posts that the guardrail used to be attached to. The road is effectively shut to the other side of this excavator here. So everything from this marker out basically got lost as the brook came from this direction and sweeps down towards the Connecticut in that direction. This whole bend really took.
Where's William Street?
You're on it, that machine's sitting on it right there, that excavator.
William Street runs from the Vermont Country Deli
Yep,
on
To
Route
the bottom of
9
Union Hill.
to Elliott Street.
okay.
Or
I know the
if
street.
it was all
Right,
open
right.
and working, that's what would happen, but you can't do that
Right.
now.
Okay,
So-
I know the street.
On the other side of
I know
that
the name.
excavator is a yellow house that they've been fixing up, and the water came within about 3 feet of their front door, and
Yeah, we'll get to that.
the
This
river's
is-
also much wider there now. too.
Right. This is looking back. This is 91 here. You can see the crane up the top of the photo here with the little balancing weight. You can actually see a minivan on the interstate right there. And so I'm trying to say actually walking at this point. So I'm looking west, and you can see the amount of material that had to be added to armor this bank and how far out they've gone. You'll notice, actually, Carolyn, you're probably the most familiar, or maybe you too, Joe. This seems to me much wider and shallower than it
You're
was.
kidding me, we could have ran across that thing before that happened.
Right, you could have. I mean, I remember
Well, you
you
could
could
have
almost
jumped
leap
rocks
it. You could
across there
you could have
easy.
jumped across it almost. Right, so it's
Well,
like
not quite, but
it's like 5 times
Oh, there are
wider.
some sections where you could have,
Right.
sure.
Right. So, and again, you get the sense of how much intrusion on the roadway there is. These little vehicles here are, again, sort of in line with the posts for the guardrail, and the road, was lost to the right of them by, a significant amount.
Rod, was that washed down to the stream bed there, or was it?
Yeah, everything that you basically
Yes.
see here wasn't there.
It was down
Yeah, it was gone.
all the way down.
yeah.
Yeah, everything was gone.
So, can I ask a question?
Jim.
So do we need to look at, when I say we, I mean, I don't know who, do engineers need to look at all these different spaces and people need to make decisions about whether to try to put that back the way it was?
Yes.
So all this stuff is going to require all kinds of engineering stuff.
From a
And-
regulatory standpoint, under the emergency declaration, municipalities and B-Trans had the ability to make emergency reconstruction. But, I think continuing on from this point,
Yep.
in the future, there are going to need to be serious conversations about exactly which bits of infrastructure are repaired to the level that they were previously, and what that actually means, and whether there's a different approach or.
Wow. And this
Yeah.
is going on in all kinds of towns all over the state.
I would say
Yes.
now, some weeks later, it seems like we got off really lightly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
compared
Yeah.
to further north.
Yep.
And
That's
certainly further west,
very true.
and Wilmington and other communities,
I went through
Jamaica.
Wilmington. I went through Wilmington yesterday. That was just unbelievable.
Right,
It's amazing.
right. So, okay, this is another kind of a close-up shot giving you sort of the angle of repose on that newly added armoring. And then you see the
There's
yellow
the yellow
house that
house.
Carolina mentioned with this pickup truck in front. So the water came, as far as I can tell from judging from the grass and so forth, not much lower than the bumper or the back of that pickup truck. And you don't quite get the sense of it, but there's sort of a little bank, a little climb, and then you go into the house. So, to put this in context, if we go back a couple of shots, okay, so you've got to imagine that the water is moving up the bank on this side where it's heavily wooded, as well as over on this side. And so you can begin to get a sense of the volume of water at the height of the...
And the river curves there, which is
Yep.
partially why it eroded that whole section out, because with the
Right.
force of that water, it just,
Right. So here's a close-up in the other direction showing you again a couple of things. Again, the amount of material that's been added to sort of hold the road in place. But then also, this is all new to me.
yeah.
All these middle-sized, I say middle-sized, these are like 3 to 4 foot. They're all new. Wherever they were, probably Marlboro, this is it now for them. So it's completely different.
Well, they replaced the ones that were there that are now in Connecticut.
Right.
Yes, didn't want anybody to feel
I'm
left
beginning to
out.
see the whole circle
Right.
of life here, that's right. Okay, that's irrelevant to some extent because it's Dummerston, but it's
Right.
Sunset Lake Road.
What was that, past Fish Road?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, this is the floodplain just east of the Dollar General store. What you see here is a wide open space. You can,
That's the bottom of
Somebody
Meadowbrook
drove out
Road,
there.
over
Right.
through the other side of those trees there.
right. The brook is going through this line of trees here. Everything in front, where I was parked, was still wet or sodden. And what I'd say is there's a couple of purposes for this photo. One is to show the extent of again, you see debris fields here and silt built up in the middle part of the photo. A couple of other things that are worthy of comment. This long grass, for whatever reason, actually worked really well as kind of a filter. And this whole area here has new meaning for me as storage for flood water. That it is interesting and important for us to work with.
That's the area that has the cattails and stuff out by the road, right?
Yep,
The
exactly.
reeds and cattails.
Yep.
At the end, straight across from the end of Edward Heights.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly. Yeah, we're opposite the Jehovah's Witness church.
Right.
And that,
Yeah.
the land in
Behind-
the back, the treed land in the back belongs to some folks that, I believe, at
Green Meadow.
here. Some folks, it's on Meadowbrook Road, but it
Meadowbrook.
belongs to some folks that Steve Phillips represents adamantly every time there's some sort of something going on there with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right,
I should say vigorously.
right.
Yes.
Okay, and so this is just a close-up of the same pile of debris, but also giving you a sense of this is exactly how the stream is working in, it's natural for it to slow when it has the ability to widen out and occupy a floodplain like this, a nice big flat area like a field. What happens is that the velocity of the stream drops dramatically, and because it drops, it actually drops its load out, which is the load being this debris. So it performs a really important function in a whole lot of ways in a sort of a hazardous situation like this when there is a flood, because this could actually be a relatively easily accessed place where things such as large as cars or propane gas tanks and so forth could be plucked later with relative ease. So it's an important safety. There's lots of things about this that make it very important. I think I've got to the end of my... Yeah.
Did you go further down on Meadowbrook down there by where Washburn Vault was and that?
Actually, what I'm trying to find here is... which I thought I had a bunch of photos. Let me just see what else I've got here. Trying to look for the ones that I took of. Okay. This one's important. You'll see here that this is, again, this goes back to Brookside. What you see here in the foreground is the kind of the bare bottom of the concrete abutment for the bridge. I don't know. Again, I don't know if this is rocks that have been smashed against the abutment and just sort of ended up being stuck there. I suspect that, but you can also see that it's sort of exposed, which is not great. This is 80 Flat Street, and you can see the debris field again in front. The line roughly where you see the brickwork on the front here, about half the height, in fact around about there where you see that little white smudge, is about the height of the flood water. The New England Youth Theatre experienced similar water levels. This is part of their property between the two buildings on Elm Street. And you'll notice the huge amount of washout. So this is a fixture for the sewer and water, and it's normally, the ground was here, and now the whole thing is exposed. You can see the big boulders, flat stones that the road had been sat on back in the 1800s, I suspect. But you get a sense of just two things. First, how much has been washed out, and then how much sediment load has been left behind. We noticed a lot in our inspections, this kind of feature where, and you see it on William Street too, where the floodwaters forced between two buildings had this sort of amazing sucking action and dragged huge amounts of material from between two buildings or a building and a ledge,
Something unforgiving.
a bedrock ledge. And at Melrose in particular, there were several of those small brick houses whose foundations were almost entirely exposed on two sides as a consequence of that kind of action. This is the infamous, or now famed, this once was a building that followed this kind of line, and you can see the roof is torqued and the whole thing is kind of collapsing. This is rushing water here in the foreground. So the foundation of the building is what is the bulwark against the stream. I was talking to Jason Cooper today, who actually owns, I think, this property over on the other side.
On the other
here.
side, yeah.
And as a consequence of the new channel, whereas before the channel used to sort of follow through here.
There was more of a bank there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And higher up, too.
And it was higher up. Now the brook is this wide and it's actually eroding. It's bouncing off this surface here and ricocheting across there, and it's eroding his bank there, which gets us to another important point about the general futility of trying to armor the bank where you notice one kind of problem today because water is flowing and it's flowing at a high speed during a flood event. All you're doing really is pushing that power onto somebody else's land. So it's a fluvial erosion hazard issue. There's no real easy way of reducing the velocity of the stream and reducing its impact. And so every time you do something like this here, which is another great illustration, this is a concrete sort of retaining wall. Beyond it is Melrose Terrace here. Everything that you see here, all these houses were inundated with up to 18 inches of sediment on the load on the floor.
On the other side, on the left, you can't see it there, but they
Right.
eroded away right up to their front doorsteps.
Yes.
And luckily, they built those very
Solidly.
when they did,
Right.
because the front doorstep is cement, but it goes down like 4 feet,
Right.
all solid cement. And
Right.
You don't buy cement steps that way anymore. They're kind of
No, that's
hollow
true.
underneath.
I don't know what they
however
were doing.
come.
Yeah. This is a trailer in Glen Park, Glen Street, which if you go back to this photo, so this is literally around the corner to the left from where I took this photo.
Is that the first one you come to as you come
No,
in on
this
the
is
right-hand
almost
side?
the last, actually. This is second. No, it might be the one next. It might be the second one in. And you can see all the debris. This is literally a bathroom sink, not a kitchen sink. Stuck underneath the trailer here. You notice it's not quite straight anymore. It's been pushed off its footings here.
Beginning.
Yeah, let me see what else I can find here.
The first one where you came in literally got moved a whole site's worth over to the spot where the next
Yes.
one would be,
Yeah.
which was
Right.
Yeah.
They've actually got photos of that, but not tonight for anyway, so that I've even got more folders if you really want to fish around, but I thought that was a good balance between state and municipal infrastructure and mostly the impact on roads, some examples of or illustrations of how the stream actually works, both in flood stage and in more normal conditions, and then the amount of private property that's vulnerable as well as public property. For the whole state in 1927, in 2011 dollars, there was $355 million worth of damage. We would exceed $355 million worth of damage just in Windham County alone. We might even go higher than that in Brattleboro. The point of this is...
Is that right?
Yes. We figured out, we've got
Public
the
and private,
library's,
right?
the library's got a record of an inquiry that the legislature conducted into the floods of 27. And because they were good at it in those days, they tallied the number of deaths of livestock and people, the number of buildings that were impacted, and they actually added up the cost. And it was like just over $6 million in 1927. And if you apply a multiplier so that you can get to 2011 dollars for the entire state, the value of damage in 1927 was $355 million in 2011 dollars. The point of that little story is
I guess what I'm asking is, it really is, people are saying that the amount of damage in Windham County alone is that kind of range?
I think so. I mean, we haven't gotten an accurate estimate, but I would find it hard to imagine that we don't top. I mean, it'll be really substantial here.
Yeah.
Extremely. I mean, I don't know what downtown Wilmington would be valued at, right? But it's replacement value for downtown Wilmington is going to be pretty high. Mount Snow and Stratton received serious damage. Pretty soon you start. I'm including damage to Route 9 and roads in that, so I'm not just talking about private damage. I'm talking about damage to infrastructure as well.
Bridges, roads,
water treatment
everything
plants,
around them,
the whole
all the
thing.
utilities, yeah.
In some cases, people have lost part of their property. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
actually,
gone.
there's a weird kind of effect of once
Other
you
people
had.
gain and some people
You used to
lose.
have 20 acres and now you've got 18.
2 acres in Connecticut, which is
Right, which you can go visit now, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. So,
worth more.
I noticed that Vermont League of Cities and Towns immediately put up quite a number of new or updated technical bulletins advising people how to respond to this catastrophe, if you will. And there was one that I read in particular that seemed rather interesting, and it seemed as it was responding to the a comment about how not totally tossed, but how essentially, I think Shumlin made a comment somewhere that Act 250 or other regulations relevant to these sort of repairs and things had essentially been tossed in the river. I think that was the acronym that was used. And then it was clarified to say that it was not that permitting no longer existed, but for a while there in the emergency phase, I mean, what theoretically, I mean, there were guys with 100,000-pound machines sitting right in the middle of a brook just baling stone as fast as they could bale it. And something that would normally have taken probably months to get permission to
Or never.
crawl into there. Or never,
Never,
right.
yes, never.
And so I noticed there was a lot of information on there,
Right.
both for homeowners and municipalities even.
yes.
Telling them where the rules were being bent and maybe for how long, I'm not sure, but it seemed like,
There's been guidance issued by the Agency of Natural Resources
right, Ann and I had bulletins on there.
on what would require permitting and what would not, and while reconstruction is underway. And it's not clear to me, and I think, literally things such as the declaration of when does the declaration of the emergency end and so forth are pivotal pieces of information in that.
In town here, do we have access to that information as to how to?
I don't think the decision to end the emergency has been made yet, but yeah, we do have the guidance, and that's what people are operating with here.
As to how to get
Yeah,
inspected
and so
assessed.
there's an incident command center that's been established for VTrans. at the Dummerston Regional
Oh, that's
Office.
what that incident command center is,
And
right.
Yeah, that's
advice on how to resolve conflicts between damaged roads, bridges, and so forth, and putting them back
Right.
is obtained almost verbally from the officials there.
Right.
Could
As
people
well, I
go
think.
to the Wyndham Regional website to get those kinds
Yes.
of? I mean, that's where I've been getting the bulletins and,
Right.
yeah,
If you can't get it from them, they'll have links to it.
yeah. Okay,
And as
so
we-
there's all that DOT or, V-Trans stuff and everything is in there. And A&R
As we
and
go
stuff.
on, those questions are going to become a little bit more difficult and more important. So,
So at 7 o'clock,
yep.
that was really good to see. We were, what our intention now, I think, is to go through this list,
Right.
or this list as prompting, and just, because I think, if you just took the fluvial erosion hazard stuff, we could probably talk for about 20 hours about that in light of this. But so that we don't talk for 20 hours about it, I think we should try to go down through this list. And the idea here is to talk about the implications with the town plan of the of flooding, the fact that it happened, what the future brings, and so forth.
Question?
Yeah, Chris. Chris, if you talk, just go up to that and say who you are, and yeah, please say who you are and where you're from.
Thank you, Jerry. My name is Chris Chapman, and I'm from Brattleboro. I'd like to direct a question to Rod and Sue about where this flood stands on the measurement chart. I had heard that we have had more than one 100-year flood in the past 25 years. And I'm wondering where this flood stands on the scale, because it seems to have been much more severe than 100-year flood that we had back in the 70s or 80s. Do you have an idea about that? Is there a authority on that, some yardstick out there?
Not yet, is what I'd say. I'm going to answer this in slightly odd pieces, Chris. We know from flood levels that have been observed in Wilmington and in other parts of Windham County that the flood waters were higher, somewhat, less than a foot, but somewhere between an inch and 4 or 5 inches, I think, than the 1927 flood. So in Wilmington, for instance, at the town offices, there was a marker on the wall that showed you the height of the 1927 floods, and you can see the watermark from this flood, and it's
10 inches above it.
Yeah.
yes, 10 inches.
Yeah.
So that's one indicator. The next indicator is when we look at where the impact was in Brattleboro, the easiest guide was if a property was or infrastructure was within the 500-year floodplain. So in other words, a 6% chance of a flood of that size in any 1 year, then there's a high likelihood that that property was impacted. There are some sort of interesting anomalies just to do with the pattern of the event and the path that the brook took, so that you could be within the 500-year floodplain and not substantially damaged, and you could even be in with a 100-year floodplain and not substantially damaged. But for the most part, in the area captured by the 500-year floodplain, you were susceptible to damage, is what I'd say. So
Yeah, it's not 6% in any 1 year, though.
no,
Because it's less.
It's right. I know it's going to be
6%.
in 5.
Yeah, I was going to say, that seems really high.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that can't be right.
well,
It would happen once every 20 years.
it's 0.2% chance of happening in any given
In
year.
any given year. So what I'm going to show you here is, it's going to be a little bit clumsy because it's a very big map and we're scrolling. The dark purple is the floodway. The light kind of violet color is the floodplain. And then this green additional band represents the 500-year floodplain. So the violet area is the 100-year floodplain, and then the green is, in addition to that, that's the extra area that would be consumed in the 500-year flood.
And that's Valley Road, that long finger up there.
Yes.
Right, and so this is Sherwood Circle here. This is the trailer park, and what you see is almost this entire lower reach of the trailer park is affected by that. Moving further into town and a little down.
Was that, do you know if that sewer line out there was one of the sewer lines that got damaged where it crosses the whetstone going from Tri-Pointe?
My understanding is no, but I couldn't be sure of that. Okay. The sewer line that was damaged was at William Street. So again here, this is the village center, West Brattleboro Village. And again, you see from here all the way across to here would be encompassed by the 500-year floodplain. What we noticed here, featuring, paying particular attention to Melrose, you can up the magnification a little bit here. And then try and find where I am. Right. So, just to focus you in a little bit, when we visited Melrose within 2 days of the event, 2 or 3 days, along this stretch of Melrose Street and Melrose Terrace here, some of these properties had been completely impacted and others almost next door to it, not so much impact at all. But you can see here that where this green line is, this is the 500-year floodplain mark. This was all where there was a huge sediment load and silt here. And many of these properties right on the edge of the 100-year floodplain were substantially impacted.
You mean the ones in the lowest elevation, the private residences, or the Melrose Terrace ones?
No, the ones,
Housing Authority ones, sorry.
The road, the street here,
Yeah.
is on a kind of a shelf. And
Right,
then,
it's up high
Yes.
for the first part of it. Rides up high from the bridge, and it rises up, and then it drops down at Sparks' house
Right.
there, down to the plateau
There's
where
sort
the
of-
Housing Authority garage
there's
is.
sort of a pocket in here, literally where the word Melrose Street is written, immediately down from that, like in this area in here,
Right.
there's kind of a pocket, and
That was really low, that was really...
that
filled
was
up
very
in there.
heavily impacted.
Yeah.
So Rod, Hayes Court,
I didn't get any.
I know it didn't get any, and
Well, it got
Could you
some,
just show-
mostly silt.
could you just show?
Oh, you want to go back out?
Yeah, just go.
Oh, it's right there, I
Just
guess,
go.
isn't it?
Oh, Garfield Drive, yeah, there it is, right there.
Yeah,
Go pretty quick.
Right here.
yeah.
It's funny
So,
little shapes.
so that was in the 500-year.
Mhm.
So
Now they did receive some. The impact wasn't nearly as severe, but they did get some. And again, the 500-year floodplain boundary is significant. You know, it's a fairly good indicator of what the cutoff was.
So,
sure, yes, please.
so in the space of the last quarter century, we've had not only a 100-year flood, maybe another one, but a 500-year flood as well.
Yes,
Fair to infer
I
that?
think yes, yes, I'd say so. We've had yes. So statistically, we've had more than we should have of storms of this magnitude.
We're switching to dog years.
Dog years.
Yeah, yeah.
So and again, you'll notice this is going to come up. This sort of this is a good segue to some extent. In earlier land use discussions, like as recently as the meeting before the flood, we talked about this. We talked about this being medium density housing, for instance,
Yeah.
and it doesn't.
Right now, it's industrial.
And it's currently zoned industrial. Right now, it looks like a really good spot to leave alone. And we're thinking of having a zoning district called Leave It Alone. But
That absorbed a lot of water during the flood.
right, and I mean, I think this was crucial again in allowing the brook to lose some speed and dump some stuff out. It performed a really important natural function. I'm not sure if it's appropriate to expect or want to or aim for more intensive development of this site on the basis of what we've just seen. But you'll also notice on the other side of the brook and on the other side of William Street,
Yeah.
the whole thing is encompassed in a 500-year floodplain, both sides of the street at this point.
And the water went
some
back there
distance.
this time.
And the
Yeah,
water actually made it there.
surrounded those houses.
Yeah,
And
like
Yeah.
3 feet high or more.
Everything
Yeah,
in
when
the,
you-
right.
When you go down further onto Frost Street, where the residents are,
Yeah.
I mean, that shows the edge of the 500. I mean, they
Yes,
pretty
this-
much all had some sort of flooding on their
Yeah.
property.
Again,
on the,
They all did.
This is
on the
almost
north side of the street.
this is almost a perfect marker for where it went. And anywhere inside the 500-year
Yeah,
floodplain
Frost
through
Place,
here
too, yeah.
was basically nailed.
it was. Yeah.
some level of water was there.
Yeah, there was some level of water damage.
And even on Flat Street near Main Street, it doesn't show there, but that was all underwater too.
Right.
They didn't count that as the
Rod,
500-year flood, but I guess it is.
I'm sorry. I remember Alstead got flooded really badly a couple of years ago by a
Yep.
less significant storm, and I was surprised they weren't adversely affected by this one. Did they make a lot of changes
Yes.
to protect themselves?
I think people left to some extent. Some of the house. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there must have been a line like right on the Connecticut River because there was really very little damage in New
Very
Hampshire
little
in general.
damage over that way. I talked to quite a few people over
Yeah,
that way,
I
and
did
they
too,
said it
yeah.
was amazing how much less damage there was. Whereas just across the river in the same similar, elevations or vertical longitudes or whatever,
Right.
it was
Yeah.
serious.
Yeah.
The north part of
Serious
town.
flood.
Black Mountain Road, the Crosby Brook. The Crosby Brook behaved itself the entire time. Didn't.
It didn't flood
Yeah.
over by the exit 3
No.
station there.
No.
It was close to the bridge. I looked at it going.
Right,
through
it
that
was
way.
close, but it didn't actually. And then even the very steep section, the dirt section of Black Mountain Road didn't collapse or fail.
The Sitco drainage system worked fine.
Yeah,
surface
I
drainage
mean,
system.
so what I'd say there is one of the really interesting features of this particular storm was how focused the damage in some ways really was, because Athens was very heavily impacted, Saxon's River was
Grafton,
very heavily impacted.
Cambridgeport.
So, there were locations, due north of Brattleboro and northwest, very close really, where the impact was huge relative to, say, parts of Dummerston and northern parts of town.
Those whole areas were impacted in 1973 with a
Right.
flood of, I don't know what they're saying, whether that one was worse than this or not, but it was pretty close.
Right. So, anyway, I hope that I don't have a one-sentence answer to your question, but I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's revealing. I mean, it seems that you provided evidence that indeed this was a 500-year flood.
Feels like it, yeah.
Well,
It'd be interesting to see what the state has to
Right.
say, but.
Right.
I have to do a hazard overlay after
I
this.
think the question had in the past.
I knew you were going to ask this question.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, and when we started on the fluvial erosion work, one of the, sort of the beginning of that work was one of the spring floods, where people
Right.
had to get evacuated in West B. And, the sentiment was, we don't want that to happen again, and we don't want this kind of evacuation to be necessary, and we don't want the bridges to just about get taken out and so forth and so on. And so that was the beginning of the effort, to develop the fluvial erosion hazard stuff, and that's why A&R came down and worked with us. And so, and that was a big event, in terms of evacuation and everything.
2005.
It was a spring,
Right. It was
a
a spring
spring
thaw event.
phenomenon,
Right.
and and so it would be easy to take, and I think the last few things that we've had, other than this one, have been pretty spring related, with runoff and snow melt and so forth. And I think, at least I'll speak for myself in our fluvial erosion stuff, we were looking at pictures and videos of that flood and thinking about it and thinking, well, it's that time of year. And I think, I don't really think this kind of thing you know, you'd have to have a big imagination to be able to imagine this like
Oh.
that, you know.
That must be me.
Well, no, but seriously, I mean, if you haven't experienced it before,
Yeah.
That was in
No.
the fall, too.
Yeah,
and we were watching a certain kind of flood, and this was a different kind of flood, you know, and so I mean, I just want everybody on the commission to be, you know, to hold on to these memories, you know, because this is exactly what we were talking about.
I just want to clarify that although we find that the damage is similar to the 500-year mark, the National Flood Insurance Program is still just about inundation. So what we saw here was a fluvial erosion event, not, you know, it matches the 500-year kind of, it's similar to that
Right.
line, but what you're looking at in that green there, that is just inundation. That's the New Orleans type flooding where
Right.
it just comes in and it sits. We were really looking at fluvial erosion.
Right.
Yeah, rapid rise.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to do this? Yeah, okay.
Inundation just comes up and goes out. Fluvial erosion is where the banks are narrower and it scours the banks on rivers when it's a smaller stream. That's the quick answer.
The background is the National Flood Insurance Program is a one-size-fits-all federal program. And so the dominant form of flooding that you experience in the United States is what you're more accustomed to seeing in parts of the Midwest, the upper Midwest, and also, you know, up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries. So to some extent, relatively slow-rising rivers that then also take an extremely long time to drain. And so the formation of the landscape itself is due to constant inundation and then draining away, which in part explains why the soils are fertile and rich and they're good agricultural lands and so on and so forth. In New England, and in northern New England in particular, it's a completely different geology. It's hard and steep slopes and not soft soils and clay so much. And so the velocity of the water is much greater because it's, as Carolina pointed out, it's trapped in a channel. And so it carries very much larger pieces of material in it, like large boulders or parts of buildings or logs or whatever, which can itself cause damage. And then it also, when it gets an opportunity to spread out, and I'd say that this area here in downtown is where it spreads out, that's when you do get the widespread impact across a number of houses. It's not really inundation flooding because it's not the slow rising of the Connecticut River then that's feeding into the tributaries that's causing the flooding. It's what they call a flash event. It's associated with a storm or something similar, you know, or in this case a hurricane. And so the streams, the hillsides run with water and collect water very quickly, and then it feeds into the streams. The streams come up very quickly in mere minutes, and the water pushes through very quickly, and then within a couple of days, most of it has subsided and gone. And then there's usually another little bump up as the hillsides drain more thoroughly. But it's a completely different kind of flooding, and it's in some regards not entirely addressed by the national program called the National Flood Insurance Program. The State Agency of Natural Resources River Management Program has done a lot of work on what constitutes fluvial erosion, and they developed this model, this scientific model to estimate it and figure out how to predict its impact. That's been accepted nationally, scientifically. FEMA has accepted it. It's now part of the guidance language in New Hampshire and other states. So they've done a lot of research on what it actually means. When we were using the 500-year floodplain line as a guide, it wasn't to say that this is a 500-year event, but it's to say that inside that boundary is where we find most of the damage, if not all of the damage. And so we're using that as a rough guideline. It wasn't the same as saying there was flooding present to the 500-year floodplain level. It was more just the brook moving around, the channel moving around in its floodplain at various points took up the entire area that we designate as the 500-year floodplain.
So does that definition mean that people might not get either National Flood Insurance or FEMA help? because it's a different definition of,
No, we're in the National Flood Insurance Program,
Okay.
and it's a flooding event that's been recognized and acknowledged, but
okay,
really the kind of conceptual basis for the National Flood Insurance Program doesn't really consider fluvial erosion, but the definitions are broad enough so that people who've lost property or been damaged can claim. And because the town maintains records and zoning regulations that restrict development in the 100-year floodplain and forbid it in the floodway, except for very special circumstances, we're a participant in a national flood insurance program.
okay. Thank you.
So, Chris,
At one point, I'd like to ask one more question,
okay.
at your pleasure.
Okay, I just wanted to move on to our
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And really, we could talk about this for a really, really long time, and it merits talking about it for a really, really long time. But that's probably not tonight. But did you have a question that would be pre this?
Just looking toward the future, if we had a 100-year flood, and then we had a 500-year flood, what about a 1,000-year flood?
Well, Constance,
That's when we have Noah build us an ark.
Gee, I don't know if we've got a definition for that one.
That's all right, that's all right.
Yeah,
Practically not much building.
I think in terms of insurance, anybody in Brattleboro can get flood insurance because the communities in there, it'll just be cheaper because the risk is lower for a 1,000-year flood.
Right,
I don't know what that would be.
right.
Thank you.
and it seems like the point of it is not so much the 1,000-year flood, but how many 500-year floods can you have in a period of time?
Or 100-year,
Or
or a
100-year
fluvial
floods.
erosion event. I
Right.
mean, to get back to James's question, which is important, the Olstead event was a much smaller event, and lives were lost, and it was much more focused. It was, the equivalent to a microburst, and it was still devastating, but in a very focused area.
And there was a failure
There was a
of
failure of a-
containment, a dam, so that was a different part,
Right,
Yeah.
it blew a
different
culvert
from
up.
here
Right.
too.
Culvert that got
But
blocked and just-
it's precisely that
That could happen.
that could happen here,
Right.
Yeah.
I guess
Right.
is what we're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know this was a list of, well, as you say here, a list of items that we put together to begin the conversation. And I don't know how we ought to go about this. There's a lot here.
Can we,
But-
with this list, as a planning commission, what are we actually responsible for adding to or changing? Zoning, the uses for different types of spaces that, changing the zoning? I mean, what,
Well, for instance, what we went through about a year and a half or so, period of time where we were trying to amend the flood hazard ordinance to include fluvial erosion, among other things. We were charged with doing the whole revision. So we spent a lot of time doing that, and that included a lot of what just happened,
so like road design standards, that's,
in the, for instance, in subdivision regs, that would be a subject that would be in there. This list is to say that there's in light of this flood event, there's things that we should be thinking about. That not that we've never thought about them before, because we thought about them a lot, but now we have more. It's poignant.
so
you might
is
say.
it the caliber, like if somebody's gonna build a bridge, let's say, are we saying that they need to build it in a certain way, they need to have different types of erosion
Well,
constraints
I think
around it, and-
if you were to review the fluvial erosion hazard language that we had, you'd see some of the stuff, and some of it was quite different from what exists, and some of it wasn't that much different from what exists,
Right.
And the point of that all is not that had something like that been adopted, that it would have made everything okay, but that certain things that happened, including things like all the stuff that was flying down, towards the dam, at least some of that, over time, you could reduce the risk of that, and
So is there a point then that we want to revisit that and renew that effort?
I think
Yeah.
that's the
Yes.
question
I
that's
think-
implicit in this list.
So if I could, I'm just going to use this zoning map as an illustration of that first item, actually. And it touches on the one that Timberley just mentioned, which was the review and update of road design standards. So one of the things that struck us about this particular event was the large number of people that were cut off during the event and in the days following the event. And some of that, arguably at least, is due to the short-sighted nature of some of the previous subdivision
Developers.
decisions that we've made. So each one of these, this PUD here, and this PUD down here, and the entire trailer park itself, which is another PUD, have either one very small bridge and road, one two-way road, or two in the case of the trailer park, that allows access. So the trailer park, this is 350 homes. This is one of the biggest residential neighborhoods in the entire town. Both the bridges were taken out within an hour of the event really starting. Luckily, these people had been, the people most vulnerable along the brook had been evacuated, so they didn't need to go back necessarily. Everyone above them was stuck. Now,
Until the water went down.
until the water went down, until the bridges
And
were
the
then
bridges
surveyed
was
to see if they were
yeah.
still sound. One of the bridges wasn't surveyed for soundness until a week after the event. So they were down to one bridge instantaneously. This community lost access. There are stories of people from this neighborhood here going to the Chelsea Royal for breakfast and not getting back home until Monday night.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And having nothing but their purse and their car keys until I did. So we think, on balance, this is probably not something that we want to encourage. Except as recently as the last time we did a major subdivision decision here, we did allow that, effectively, to happen at Brookside. So Brookside, as you head back into town, is another example of where you've got a relatively large, or at least the potential, if it's built out, for a relatively large residential community to have one means of egress, entry and egress. I'm trying to find it here.
It's not listed as a PUD there, I don't think.
No, this map is already out of date. Don't you love it?
No,
So,
it's back there near where the word Brattleboro is.
yeah, it's back up in here. In fact, it's right here. This is Brookside.
They do have an emergency exit that goes out through the park.
But one of the things that so it's just in through here, I think.
Yes.
One of the things that we discovered about this event again is that perhaps differently from times past, at least since 1927, there are far more people at home with chronic health conditions that need constant management, or at least constant access to important resources like oxygen. And you make assumptions that they can do it until something like this happens, and then we ended up having to find alternate ways of delivering oxygen to stranded people, and the only way to get it to them was on a four-wheeler, or in other communities, mountain bikes. So we think that as we age, and there are more single-person households, we think that this is actually a pretty easily predicted set of conditions that we should be really addressing literally in our subdivision design regulations, so that where we know, as we know now, that we've got several neighbourhoods that are basically what we call in slang terms lollipop subdivisions, one way in and one way out, that we should work very hard to eliminate those existing lollipops and basically prevent any more lollipops. Would be one, so that's the first item right there, the subdivision circulation and access design, I think is, just to sort of illustrate that. Then the next one is, we know that there's roughly 68 structures in the floodway in Brattleboro. We now find out that relative to some other communities in Vermont, that's not particularly high. But we think that we should be much more conscientious about relocating them and making appropriate arrangements to do that.
So, just a question. In the paper this morning, I think it said that there were 7 mobile homes on Glen Street, or 7, 8, I don't know, several, that will not be able to be
They're in the floodway
Inhabited.
and they were substantially damaged. And so the rules under the National Flood Insurance Program are that you cannot spend more than 50% of the assessed value in repairs or improvements to a damaged structure without complying with the ordinance, and that means that you can't, that you have to get a permit for that work, and you wouldn't get a permit because you're in the floodway.
Okay.
So it's
So
sort
you're
of
not grandfathered in that
No.
way? Yeah.
no,
Okay.
it's one of the
Not
few.
once you've been substantially damaged.
Once you've been substantially damaged, your grandfathering also ends.
And 50% of what?
The assessed value of the trailer home. So
value.
that can be remarkably low. That can be $3,000 or $4,000, which is not a lot of repair work.
Is this the kind of thing where, I hate to say this, I mean, where FEMA buys people out? I've heard it. I don't want this to go on the television networks.
Too late.
But I've heard stories of people being beyond repair and really not wanting to continue to have to deal with that again and again and again, the flooding. And, I mean, there was it was on television last week, some town in New York that FEMA bought them out. Whatever that means exactly.
Benicia, New York. Yeah, I think under certain circumstances there are some programs within FEMA that may be able to be used that way. We've done some preliminary investigations earlier on. It's pretty difficult to access those funds, and I don't know if there's going to be a change now, but it's certainly something I think that people would want to explore.
There might be other properties like that industrial site that we talked about that would be worthwhile to be purchased or used for
Yes,
that.
exactly. Right, as flood
Yes.
storage.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, I didn't want to sort of derail the conversation, but I just wanted to sort of try and illustrate what we were thinking about there.
I think it would be good to go down through this list
Sure,
at
okay.
least and
So,
talk about it.
the next one is hazards associated with steep slope development.
Was that?
So
did we
quickly
address-
on that.
We addressed that in the Fluvial Erosion, didn't
well,
we, mostly?
Not a lot.
Not a lot,
Never-
not as much as we
never got
should have.
there. We kind of talked about it as,
Yeah.
well,
One
that
of
would be
our-
another part of it.
One of our future things
Yep.
is to talk about steep slope development, and so this will change that conversation, or enrich it.
Yeah.
Right. I think a couple of challenges there are, to use the term that you used before, I could envisage a situation where you're on a steep slope. Your property consists of a steep slope, and you already have some structure that, straddles or, is arranged on the slope. And then you seek a permit, and you will argue that grandfathering would allow you to continue to do that. And what our response would be. I actually am not entirely sure what our ability would be to say that would not be permitted. But I do think one of the other things that you can see just from looking at the zoning map in general is that in large part all the flat areas in town, setting aside the fact that they're mostly floodplains, which have their own set of hazards. What is left is pretty steep. And so driveways as well as house sites or home, or sites for a structure are pretty limited, and you are going to have to address steep slopes. So again, to go back to the most recent large-scale subdivision that was permitted here, that parcel features some extremely steep slopes, which presents access issues.
And one entrance.
And one entrance. So, if you're going to sort of score that application from a hazard standpoint, it's not going to score any points for one entry point, and it's not going to score any points for dealing with steep slopes.
You probably won't flood, though.
No.
No, I think by the time you're there, you should be okay.
Yeah, right.
But you want to have a good freezer.
Right.
So the next item is fluvial erosion hazard and/or regulating in the 500-year floodplain. I mean, I think we could spend a long
Right.
time talking about it, and it would be pretty easy to envision a lot of what we were talking about now,
Right.
Well, I think we should just, maybe that just says we need to bring back at some soon future point, the fluvial erosion zoning and look at it again and do that. I think it'll be much less controversial this time.
Right. The one other
For
point,
obvious reasons.
the one sort of almost anecdotal thing I want to add on to that, controlling what happens in the 500-year floodplain. Again, one of the things that we noticed this time around that was really disturbing was the amount of junk that ended up in the brook. Really large junk, like commercial-sized propane gas bottles bobbing up and down and exploding, entire cars, dumpsters, very, very, very large numbers of accessory structures like garden sheds with snowblowers in them, with the snowblower slowly coming out as it gets crushed, going down, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We don't regulate how, if you're in the floodplain, your propane gas bottle is supposed to be tied down and made resistant to being ripped out. I would say that's an area for enforcement activity. But I think that maybe thinking about the 500-year floodplain as the boundary for really being a lot more emphatic about accessory structures, how they're secured, what's in them, floodproofing.
I think the main difference between the special flood hazard area is there you often have to elevate it. In the 500, it's usually floodproofing
Right.
as opposed to elevating. But,
So-
people's homes
Taking
were
the
damaged
pressure
by
off
the
the
water.
building, letting it flow through. And
Yes.
stuff
So,
like that.
and spending a lot more time thinking about the potential impact for debris being dislodged within that field, because I think from an emergency services standpoint, as well as a public safety standpoint, the number of propane gas tanks alone and fuel oil tanks. So many of the fuel oil tanks that were attached to the outside of the trailers were gone. Now the contents are gone as well as the tank is gone. And that all constitutes a huge hazard. And that's what the cleanup crews confronted in the days afterwards. Along with, all sorts of other things. There were two vehicles outside the 80 Flat Street structure alone that had been lifted up, and underneath them, before they came down on top of a propane gas bottle. So they were sort of like a sitting bomb.
I should probably know the answer to this question, but the New England Youth Theater had flood doors which prevented
Floodgates,
a
yep.
significant amount of damage. Who is it? Who enforces that? Where does it say that
We do.
we do? And it's supposed to say that in here, and it does or it doesn't, or what? Like Flat Street, why didn't they have something like that in place?
New England Youth Theater is a relatively new structure, and so it was
They
covered
did that on
by.
their own.
They elected to spend $500 for those floodgates.
Yes.
Only $500.
Wow.
And they said it saved them tens of thousands.
So
Also, they built the
it was
It
foundation.
was a requirement.
It was a requirement of their permit.
Uh,
Yes, it was.
Was it really?
Yeah. So it was the
Still,
yes.
$500.
$500?
Yeah.
Well, the new cultural intrigue, it was a requirement of their
Right,
yeah.
permit
right, I
as well.
remember that.
Right. Yeah.
Because you need to be
Yeah.
flood-proofed 1 foot above
And
the
the New England
BFE.
Youth Theater building, bottom part of the building is cement. The siding doesn't start till about 4 feet up.
Right.
Also.
So it's been designed to, as far as it can be in the occupation of the floodplain. And they did have floodgates, which
So
worked.
Are they in the 100-year?
Yes.
Yes.
That's it?
Yes.
Just 100-year?
Yes, they're in a 100-year floodplain.
But they're not in the floodway?
No.
No.
Sit right on the
Wouldn't have
brook.
been able to.
They wouldn't have
Really?
been able to build on the
I wouldn't be
in the
able to
floodway.
build.
Huh.
Really, that's not in the floodway, the
No,
back
I
of
know.
that building?
I know. Don't go
I
there.
think it cuts across the back.
The chain link fence back there is though.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what holds the
Yeah,
bank
all the
in
Dorito
place.
packets are usually in the floodway, and then you can almost touch them from the back window. But
We could pull it up, I'm
yeah,
pretty sure.
right,
No,
right, yeah,
we wouldn't be on the map because it wasn't part of it.
right.
Oh, no, it would be on the other
This one, the SFHA.
one. Nope.
No,
Oh, yeah,
which one do you want?
the SFHA.
This one. We can verify this for you.
They are,
Let me make it bigger.
You just said it couldn't be in the floodway. I thought it could if it were elevated.
no.
It's
Was it built brand new
Not
or
in the
was it a
flood
rehab?
It
of
goes
an
to the back of
existing
their
building?
building.
right,
It kind of hits the back.
Which one?
Yeah.
This
Oh,
is them.
The,
right. So it just
It's kind of in the back.
Oh,
it
yeah.
just
it was built
touches,
before the room.
right?
Yeah.
And
There's
literally,
also the
it's,
old canal in there too.
it's down to design decisions about how the structure was actually made. And so
And they had to pour like another 4 inches of concrete on it,
Yeah.
they anchored the building,
so
and
it wouldn't be buoyant, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
And
All that.
that's part of the
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
right. So and then you notice the floodplain actually ends not just on the street but over the street at this point, right? Some distance. So
So let's go to the next
Okay.
item, if
Yep.
you don't mind.
sure.
Appropriateness of 3-acre zoning in rural district.
What's that mean? Do we already have 3 acre or?
So right
We
now,
do.
yeah, we have the almost entire western part of town, which is steep, accessed by, it's physically constrained, accessed by dirt roads, is challenging, is all under 3-acre zoning right now.
So I'm just gonna drag you out a little bit.
And
So
the appropriateness, would the question be?
So the question there is that an area of town that we feel is appropriate for development? And if it is 3-acre appropriate? If it's not, is 3-acre zoning kind of, is that enough to discourage it? It's kind of the Sunset Lake, there's a whole section that's zoned rural off of Halliday Brook Road,
Right.
which is portions are class 4, you can't even get there.
unfortunately, yeah, the shading on this map is not great. It's much nicer on my laptop, but this is slightly grassier green than this green here. So roughly, if you cut Brattleboro in half and everything to the west from this point on is predominantly rural, and the minimum parcel size is 3 acres. Everything to the east of that, the zoning is a little denser. But the question we have is, in Sunset Lake is sort of a cutout, I guess. So it goes roughly like this. If you've got 3 acres as the minimum parcel size, you can get a lot more development going on out here over time than you might be kind of conscious of. And what that presents is these are, as Sue pointed out, class 3, sometimes even class 4 roads, which are class 4 by definition is not maintained by the town. You have a large number of private roads. You have a large number of very long private driveways. And so what you end up doing by having a 3-acre minimum lot size, you don't discourage family, typical family residences from these fairly isolated parts of town. And it means that in an event like this, you're more likely to confront emergency service challenges because you're going to rescue highly isolated people. And so it puts a demand on emergency services that you could predict, because we're talking about it now, and to some extent avoid. It dovetails in with other discussions that we've been having about the most appropriate kind of land use. So in some people's minds, 3-acre parcels in rural designations permits what they call rural sprawl. And there's lots of issues associated with that, including the breaking up of farmland and vistas and a whole bunch of other natural assets that we also have discussed at length and put relatively high values on. But this kind of event throws into stark relief how, if this pattern of continued 3-acre parcel size development, or roughly the same, somewhere between 3 and 10, you could end up having a fairly significant population living in very isolated circumstances that becomes extremely challenging during an event like this.
So
Can we overlay the 500-year thing on that and see where?
No.
Because we're talking about, like, right now this discussion is
Right.
all of West. Really, it seems like everything west of that.
We can. It's okay. What I'm going to do, but you're going to have to switch backwards and forwards.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean, we don't have to.
It's not
I mean,
really
it just
near
feels
those.
like we're making a decision on a very large tract of land, large space of land, when the 500-year flood problem is in a relatively small.
What?
It-
Yeah, you know.
It's kind of,
I mean, I'm
it's
sure
bigger
there.
than that. I mean,
Because of access, it's
Yes,
bigger.
it's more of an access issue than a hazard on the parcel issue.
Yeah.
So it gets
Yeah,
back to
I get
that anecdote of having to get oxygen bottles via four-wheeler to somebody who's the other side of a road washout.
But at the same time,
Their choice
if
to
you
live
look at the
there.
town, there's much more potential. I mean, if you take that, there's much more potential on the western side of Brattleboro for development than there is on the east.
Yes.
And it could be like a whole different town on top of the town,
Sure.
if
So it
that were to
becomes-
occur.
Right.
it can become a resources issue for the town. I mean,
Right.
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 And again,
Because it's the
and then
incremental
sprawl
type of
issue is
development.
to
Right.
focus development on the areas that are more densely
Right.
settled and
Right.
But if we were looking at it on a contour basis, for instance, or, you know, we looked at different factors, I don't know the answer to how developable it is. You
I
know.
think it probably would behoove us to have a series of actions to prevent it, like a higher acreage, a steep slope ordinance, and a 500-year flood ordinance, and the three and maybe others would combine to rein that in.
Yeah. I want to point out, it is a market choice. People do choose to live there. One of the weirder things about government in general, but municipal in particular, is that it's not infrequent that people will buy property, residential property, on a Class 4 road, which by definition is not maintained. I mean, it's pretty clear at the outset. And then they sort of look around and go, oh, I've got 3 neighbors now. And then they come along and say, it'd be really great if you took up the road. And then an expectation develops that the town is going to take up the road and start to maintain it. Setting that aside, emergency service personnel are obligated, if you call, to attempt a rescue, and puts them in
Whether
an
that road's
extremely
a class 4 or not.
in an extremely difficult situation where you can imagine that they've got these kinds of complex rescues going on in multiple different locations, all in this isolated part of town, which means that it really taxes their resources in a very dramatic way. I would hazard a guess that apart from the major arterial routes in town, it was the more remote dirt roads that presented the single biggest challenge. They ended up becoming very important because they provided alternate access to Wilmington, for instance. So Ames Hill Road was initially washed out, but reconstructing Ames Hill Road became really critical because that was the alternative to Route 9. It's exacerbated to some extent when you start shifting from a farm community type setting to a much denser house every 3 acres setting on a road such as that. And so I think in general we would like the question of the minimum lot size to be addressed. And it might be in response to things such as slope conditions or something else.
It's also a sustainability issue because everybody moves to Vermont and clears the mountain and thinks that they're being green, but it's anything but.
Yes, the greenest thing to do is to live very close to town so that you walk to access your services.
That's right.
Well, and some of what our fluvial erosion discussions were about was the clearing of land up in the upper
Yes.
reaches, and
How
Yes.
that was affecting
Yes.
us.
what the effect was down below. And,
Right.
You know,
And luckily it's Marlborough that's upstream, and they've not cleared
right,
substantially, and they won't.
right.
Okay.
So the
So,
next one.
Do you think, well, can I just go back to that?
Sure.
Would you, if we evaluate some of the different constraints in that area, would you, because this is something that would show up on the future land use map, would you like us to propose something,
yeah,
You mean
justify
in the
it
town
to you?
plan?
yes.
In the future,
Future
In the
land use,
future land
the
use
future
section.
land use
Yeah.
section of the land use.
Because it wouldn't
chapter.
be this entire, well, I mean, we'd have to take a look at it. We can even,
We could have a if this then that, if this then
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right,
Just what Liz was saying.
yeah.
right.
You're thinking make it go from 3 to 5?
I don't know what the number would be.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what the ideal cutoff would be. I don't know that 5 necessarily gets you out of the problem, but
5 is kind of the rural norm, though, right?
might be a little
Around
bigger than
here.
that.
Yeah.
There used to be the classic 10.1 for reasons to do with the septic law. Septic laws used to prevail for 10-acre sites and smaller, so you would always sell your parcels at 10.1, which would alleviate the new buyer of any responsibility with the septic system.
Yeah.
But that ended
Yeah.
a couple of years ago.
2005. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. Like, if it's agriculture, you often see 40. So if you were trying to preserve ag land there,
Yeah,
it'd be
Yeah.
40. I'm not sure what forestry,
right.
what the standard is. Other towns have tried, some successful, some not, at 27, because you can put it in current use and still have a homestead.
Right.
so you could suggest something, and then we could look more into what the acreage would be.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And maybe there's a gradation. Maybe it's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, smaller parcels on existing roads that have already got some development, and those more difficult to access it. Reaches with much larger parcels, effectively up in the northwestern corner where it borders Dummerston. Maybe that's, you know, something that you really do try and protect with a larger size. So there may be some refinement in the minimum parcel size or something. Okay, so areas for natural storage in the floodplain. We addressed that a wee bit before. Yeah, remind me, Spring Tree. Oh, yes, right, okay. So here, I'm going to jump up the map a little bit. Try and find myself again. Oh, this is ideal. Okay, so this is curious to some extent. This is the retreat meadows through here, and it's all in the flood plain, and then for 100 year, and then this little green bump out here. This is Linden Street, and this is where there's structures associated with the
Retreat Farm,
yeah. So
craft cheese.
right. So where
And
am
our
I?
new ball field is right in the floodplain, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just above this big symbol, this big advertisement for Wyndham Regional Commission, and somewhat it's right here.
Yeah.
Somewhat miraculously, it wasn't seriously impacted, which is another feature of the sort of the weirdness of the storm, its path more than anything.
Because other times that field has been flooded. I've seen that.
It's
field.
much more of a spring feature when
Yeah.
the West River sort of backs up with
Ice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
There was one year when that happened.
right. So I'm trying to find Spring Street. I'm trying to even remember where it is.
It's back, by the fire station to the left of it.
Right. Oh yeah. So I got lost too.
So,
Right there. See the loop right there? Right there. No, you
below
almost
the,
touched it.
below the
Down
little
and
loop.
to the right.
Rod,
Green.
go down
There.
right there.
That one.
Yeah.
Right there.
Right. We're doing Spring Street.
Yes.
Yeah, that one. So, what did you say, when you left, you said Spring Street?
Oh, Spring Tree.
Spring Tree.
Yeah, I don't think it might.
Oh,
not
that's
be
the
on this-
marina.
That's
Yeah,
right,
the
that's
marina.
what I meant.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
it might not
right.
be on this map.
No, it's going to be.
I don't think it is.
Right, so that's the land. Ooh, it might be obliterated by that big ad for Wyndham
It's
Regional.
the industrial land near the
That was
marina.
the other one,
We've talked
in
about
the
that.
multi-zonal area there.
Yeah,
where-
okay, we can do it on the zoning map. Now that I know what I'm really thinking about.
Sorry,
It's all right.
it's the pink.
Yeah.
The tiers of the YMCA and all that stuff from.
Oh, no, don't-
No,
bring
it's
it up.
further down. It's
Yeah,
not.
it's that.
Where we
It's the
started.
cornfield just beyond the marina, where the solar location is. So
Oh,
I
in
mean,
Hamilton's fields, right?
yeah, Hamilton's old farm.
It's what I gaze on when things get to be too
Look
much.
at that. Okay, so
Yeah.
right here. Okay.
That's all in the plan.
This is all in the
West
floodplain.
River West.
Yeah, and so we had.
West River
What's
waterfront.
blue again? Is that the floodway?
This is
It
the zone.
doesn't
this,
show on the
this
map.
is the zoning
Oh,
map.
oh,
So,
okay.
and it's obscured by that big label on the other one. We can do it. We can do it with this one.
No,
No,
because that was FEHA.
that's just FEHA. All right. So, all right. Where are we? We're in the zoning map.
There.
The floodplain, as you remember, it sort of goes like this. And this is the cornfield, and the Royal Plaza is up here, right?
It's a little marshy field.
It sort of goes like this. It's marshy field, very good. And sort of cuts through here. This obviously takes in these water bodies, and then sort of comes back out here. And this is the marina, if I've got it right,
Yeah.
right here, and sort of it touches the edge of that. Okay. So we had discussed this big kind of purple area, but not because of purple for floodplain, but or floodway, but purple because of industrial. And what have we decided? We had discussed about its potential being for.
I think
space.
Senior
We had just talked about it actually being
housing.
open space, but we need maybe this. So this is another vital flood storage area,
Yeah.
right? Partly because if you can see that what's really amazing about both the West River and the Whetstone is that the neck of both of those as they enter the Connecticut is tiny relative to the area immediately upstream. So you get this flattening out effect where if you can grab a hold of some storage space, it's really important to have it.
But what happens there isn't so much that something spills over the bank as much as those waterways there get bigger and bigger, you know?
Yes, they creep out.
Yeah,
They don't go in this direction very much, but they go like this.
yeah,
Like, have you seen them now? Are they?
they're big.
Yeah, I think even this one's pretty big, right?
I mean, if you go to the top of the
Down
hill
behind
drill
you.
and
Yeah,
look
right.
down,
It's a
There's a lot
very
of water
aquatic
down there.
environment all of a sudden. Yeah, right.
looks like Holland or something,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, so anyway, so this is another flood storage site. I don't know what to call it, but flood storage is
Flood
good.
storage, open space.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, okay.
And I don't remember more of those sorts of places being identified along the Whetstone during our fluvial erosion discussions. I
No,
mean,
we didn't.
There
That-
was the Lock Farm, and there was the farmer's market spillover.
Yep.
Yeah.
The lock farm functioned as intended. I mean, I think people were sort of intending to actually get in there and make it more effective, you know, like knock out some of the berm that had built up there over time, but this event did that for us.
Yeah.
I think that it's the one kind of near Burge, is it Sir Sassimo owned? It didn't come up during fluvial erosion, but I think that there was some people from the state who always viewed that as an important
Yes.
kind of specific project that
Yes.
they looked at that parcel, and I mean, we had already looked at it earlier tonight, that informed.
Oh, they did bring that up? I
Yes,
didn't
in
remember
their
that.
in their study that gets a mention.
Okay.
So that's
I think it was the
Along
carrot
Williams,
to the
across from
sticks.
Williams Street there.
yeah, that
Yeah,
was
that
offered as a
bottom end.
carrot. That's
Yeah.
right.
But that would be like a taking, right?
I think that they were going to organize something like some kind of grant-based
Mhm.
project, yeah, buyout,
There it is,
basically.
CI.
Right. So yeah, so where it says CI here,
Yeah.
this whole, and you can tell from the path, these sorts of really sharp meanders. And you clearly it's hemmed in by the rock, but it gets this really small opening here, and this is a very important natural feature. It does raise questions about what's happening here, but
It's higher elevation.
but this is higher elevation. It's sort of a spine that runs up and is at the same level as elevation as Burge Street very quickly. So you
That's why there
climb
was-
very steeply here.
Obviously, so much pressure on those buildings right there, the one that had collapsed partially into the river because of it
Right,
coming around that corner, and then it obviously had to narrow down
right. Yeah, it goes into a sort of a chute, and then
to go under the bridge.
there is the bridge that itself is a bit of a challenge
Yep.
at Elliott. So this bridge
Yeah.
here, it's very narrow through here, and so a lot of that velocity and force is borne by these buildings along here.
So it would seem like it would be appropriate to take a real serious look at what other areas there might be
I think so.
in light of what's happened.
And then with that photo that I showed you immediately east of the Dollar General store in West Brattleboro would be another area. I think that field is already conserved
It is.
land.
That's
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
slopes that you were talking
Right.
about, right, Joe?
Hamilton's, yeah.
Right.
That's one of their fields in conservation.
Hamilton's,
So then the next item, improving
yeah. Existing
street connectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was just looking at where do we have the lollipops now? Could they possibly go through? Could we improve connectivity? Be difficult to do.
Not exactly in some, like where Carriage Hill was put in up there is very close. Two properties above, between it and Edward Heights, right in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one little, you could
actually
you
walk.
could almost shovel a notch through there and you could, pass through there. I mean, that's one connecting point that could easily be made into a road. Also, I think out in West Brattleboro, the one up behind Westgate, that somehow seemed like there was a way that.
Sherwood Circle up there.
Yeah, Sherwood Circle, actually, that is kind of a loop, so,
Right. So
Yeah, but getting another egress.
At one
I
point,
would
there
have been nice
was,
to have a road out of.
remember when those guys were proposing that development up behind the New England house?
Right, they were gonna,
They were going to connect to Sherwood Circle
Yeah.
that
Right, right.
way, yeah.
is it conceivable? These are not exactly at the same elevation, are they? So is it conceivable that following
part
some
of-
kind of contour line through here, something could happen?
Well, that is the place right there between them is where there was a development that was proposed.
Right.
Closer to Route 9, but,
Right.
and that one was, they were talking about hooking up to Sherwood Circle,
Okay.
possibly.
I mean, this just made it on the list of some.
I think it's just something that we
thought
could
about.
pay
Carriage Hill
attention
also
to.
has close to
Greenleaf
Greenleaf, but
Right.
you're going to have to go across the
Have to go
brook.
the brook.
Right.
Ames Hill
Yeah.
Brook.
I mean,
But it's very close there.
I'm not familiar enough with the landscape here, and I know that Ames Hill Brook is not without its issues, which
Yeah.
is along here. It has a mapped floodway and floodplain as well. But what I'd say is, looking very quickly at this zoning, you can actually better distinguish between the light green and the darker green or the brighter green here. This is rural. Maybe this is what taking into account that I'm not talking about the topography here at all, which could be a really big challenge. Maybe what we need to do here is encourage some infill development that
could
encourages
link those
development
two.
along this slope. So before with that earlier conversation when we were talking about minimum lot size in rural, maybe this is a question for the future land use in terms of actually designating this something else apart from rural.
Right.
And then encouraging infill housing through here because it accesses existing infrastructure and it also achieves breaking up these lollipops.
No,
and the big parcels, and also in that area there, that's relatively very high ground up there.
Yes.
Certainly would be way out of the floodplain or flood hazard.
Yeah.
Yet
I just want to
central-
emphasize, I don't know who owns it. I don't know anything about the topography or what you'd find there if you went there with a chainsaw. So, it may not be appropriate for what I just said at all, but that's kind of the thing I'm thinking about, of balancing off concentrating development in certain locations in return for reducing development in other locations.
That whole area, the topography
Wow,
and the
you've
soils.
got the,
in
where'd you get that
area.
thing from? You what?
What's
What's that?
That whole area in there, I've dug in there, I've dug foundation holes in there. That whole area in there is just the cleanest gravel you could ever want to buy. I mean, it's really,
Wow.
it's a high area up from the riverbeds, supposedly, as they came down through
A
there
lot of
years
glacial
ago.
moraine, huh?
Glacial.
Maybe we can look into whether there's some sort of program to provide emergency access for places that need.
Right. That's,
Emergency
yes.
hazardous
Yeah,
materials.
exactly.
That should be something that the DRD thinks about when they're working on the new plan for the Upper Brookside new development.
Right.
Because that's all one,
Right.
Yeah.
one,
If we
that's
brought
all
it before.
lollipop again, even though it has a fire lane out of
Yeah.
It's not the
the
same.
current Brookside, but I'm not sure what's in the plan for the upper
Right.
end, and that would be really important again.
Okay.
because-
So the next two bullet points are about stormwater and low-impact development. And I think that one of the things that we found when we were working on the fluvial erosion hazard ordinance was that, and I think one of the illogical items that came up a couple of years before that was that there wasn't a lot of connection between the flood hazard ordinance and low impact development and stormwater and all that. I mean, it seemed like it was like a really site specific kind of thing, and then it was a really like we had to take a big look at it, and it was very confusing. I think it's something that needs a big look at.
Right.
You know what I mean? It
Yep.
was, because there was all kinds of discussion in this room about that just went off the tracks, and it was all about the stormwater on a site and what impact that had on a flood event, and I mean, it was just like, nobody could figure it out. You know?
Oh, well,
Connection between stormwater management
and flooding.
and flooding,
Pardon?
but it's not site specific, it's
It's-
general.
it is general, but I mean, it's one of those real land use conundrums or contradictions. So, stormwater permitting is managed on a parcel by parcel basis, but it's done that way in the knowledge that cumulatively, taken together as a neighborhood or as a community, even stormwater does have a relationship to flooding events, and poor stormwater management can certainly exacerbate flooding. And the ability of stormwater systems to manage and treat stormwater in heavy rain events is a really critical aspect of minimizing erosion and other forms of impact on natural streamways. So the more extreme example is, for instance, if you take the part of the Whetstone Brook that between Elm Street and the Connecticut River, it's ditched, it's channelized, it's got concrete retaining walls, it's been very heavily manipulated, and it operates like a very big ditch. If you're in California or something, that's what they would refer to it as. Further out, the Whetstone is still heavily impacted by human activity, including its contents, what finds its way into the brook. But it has the ability to move around within its floodplain to some extent. It's constrained in some ways, but it is much more natural in its course. So you get that kind of issue. And then, witnessing even the heavy rain event that happened a week after the storm on Putney Road, the swales the fairly shallow but wide swales that are in front of Auto Mall, where they now park new cars for sale. The water was up to the bottom of the doors on all the cars after 40 minutes of rain, heavy rain. The parking lot out front, at the front of Staples, was 5 inches deep in water. All the catch basins were completely clogged. Putney Road had standing water on it, so upwards of 4 inches deep between Auto Mall and the parcel on the other side.
In an instant, too.
Yeah.
It happened very fast.
Right. So these are all, stormwater management systems implemented on those sites with different standards would lead to different outcomes, I guess is what I'm saying. And then you've got to imagine that water made its way somewhat untreated into the Connecticut River within seconds on that day. And so all the trash and waste and material that went with it is now in Connecticut. And there's an impact for some other community to deal with. So there is a relationship between stormwater and flooding, is what I'd say. It might not need to be a hurricane type event to actually do it, and that might overwhelm the stormwater system. But it's really important. I don't think you can permit it on anything but a parcel by parcel level, but understanding that its cumulative impact is really significant. To finish off on the Putney Road example, the consultants that have been working on stormwater design for Putney Road, partly because it's after this big storm, after Irene, we met last week and they discussed how one of the limits on very intense development on a flat area like Putney Road may be how much space you need to actually allow for on-site stormwater management.
Right.
Right? So that's the way it would feed back into those kinds of decision-making processes.
Yeah. Okay. Maggie? Please.
I'm making the assumption, and I'm sure I understand correctly, that the outcomes from this latest storm are going to be well documented as far as results of roads out, where this is happening,
Oh, yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah.
Or at least
Fairly well.
sufficiently well.
Right.
And given these 2 points, the stormwater management and integrate green infrastructure, there are, and I won't take a lot of time, I just wanted to make the point that if these are well documented, we kind of know where the weak points are in an event like this, and we're pretty sure that this is not an anomaly, that we're going to have this kind of recurring, maybe not to this extreme, but still enough that we would need to take precautionary steps towards the next event. That these 2 points, especially the green infrastructure best management practices, would be a factor in the town plan that would, move us more in that direction to mitigate, because we know now where the weak points are.
Right. I guess the one point to layer on top of Maggie's is that you can design systems that mimic natural processes for stormwater management, and it's more challenging to some extent in topographies like northern New England, but it's not impossible. And so the question is, what kind of design rules do you need, and what kind of space do you need to actually implement those measures? So, because for the most part, what I'd say is the stormwater systems that we've been designing and installing up to now assume kind of a large-scale infrastructure system that collects it all and then treats it at a single point and then releases it into something like the Connecticut. And I think between federal regulation and really pushing back, because communities on Long Island Sound are actually impacted by those sorts of decisions, and some innovations in environmental engineering design, there's plenty of opportunity to mimic natural systems. Our ordinance doesn't reflect that at this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and in smaller neighborhoods, you could see areas on, like in residential neighborhoods that are on a hill, you can see where all that stormwater builds up. You could have people build rain gardens to infiltrate that water off so it doesn't go into the sewer
Sure.
system, if there is a sewer system in
Yep.
those neighborhoods.
Yep. Okay.
Well, the next one is review update of road design standards, which is what Timberly asked about
Right.
a long time ago. Seems like only hours.
that's sort of a given. I think the challenge there is that the town uses the state road design manual as its basis for it, which every town pretty much in Vermont does. I'm hoping that, again, as a consequence of this, V-Trans actually pulls out the manual, and in fact, we know that it is it's being rewritten as we speak by the same people that are doing the study on stormwater design for. Actually, the state stormwater manual is being rewritten and revised by the same consultants that we are using for Putney Road, which is very, very good news. So we're hoping that one of the impacts of that is that the road design manual itself gets redrafted, cognizant of these sorts of events.
Well, we definitely have a governor who's supportive of all that. I'll quote him here one day last week. We've got to rethink where you build houses, where you build your schools, where you build highways, and how you build them. We really have to redefine our floodplains.
Yeah, the last part had me a bit worried, but that could mean a couple of different things. But
Yes, but
yeah,
anyways.
I think the sentiment as well.
I think we have a state government that's supportive of all this.
it.
Is the
Yeah.
point about that.
So is there an effort that, like a road design effort, change effort, that goes on independently of all the emergency work that has to, I mean, is it all hands on deck as far as getting the roads
Right now, it's all hands on
rebuilt
deck,
and-
just trying to put things back so you can move ambulances and fire trucks from one location to the next.
I mean, I wonder how long it's going to be like that into the future.
What missed opportunities?
We are
Yeah.
professionally really concerned about the
Beating the winter before you get, I mean, aren't they
Yeah.
concerned about that, though?
well, people are obviously very concerned about the winter for a whole lots of reasons,
Yeah.
including which the hot mix plants shut down about what,
Thanksgiving
mid-November.
traditionally.
So
Depends on the weather.
8 weeks from now. So your ability to actually finish your road is actually really in jeopardy at this point. Hot mix,
Asphalt.
it's the asphalt.
The asphalt.
So- and
Tourism.
has a really big economic impact because it limits tourism. So there are some real legitimate concerns there. On the other hand, there are some real legitimate concerns about once you've committed these resources to repairing a road so that it's back to the way it was a month ago, you may have committed yourself to a course of action that within a year or two you're really going to regret. And so the challenge here is the emergency response, which is still underway, actually blocking off options and opportunities for the medium to long-term response, which I
Right.
think is what the governor was actually getting at.
Yeah.
It's not clear to me at this point what's going on within the Agency of Natural Resources and V-Trans to really resolve this issue. And of course, part of the problem there is that they are the victims of the storm in such a huge way that individually as professionals have been hugely impacted.
Yeah.
And so it's just a very troubling point, I think, in the post-storm.
It's
And
like
also,
they-
each one, it sounds like, needs its own sort of decision matrix to figure out what's the right move to do, right? It's not like there can be a blanket.
Well, I think it's going to come down to some kind of thing where one viewpoint is going to be in conflict with another, and there's not going to be a mechanism to adequately resolve those differences. And so, addressing how you actually get to the end point seems to be needed now, and it's not clear to us that anyone's available to do that.
And individuals and businesses will be essentially hanging in the breeze in the meantime.
They are, to some extent, people are already in that fairly precarious state.
You know, on the other hand, some things are being considered that have never been considered before. I mean,
Right.
you know, we may wind up making the expedient decision most times, but there's going to be some decisions that are made that are going to move this whole thing forward.
Right.
If only because the weather's going to get in the way of finishing up some
Right.
things, you know.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
as Rahm Emanuel said, right?
Yeah, I know what Ram said.
But
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there's going to be infrastructure, if you want to say improvements made in this period of time on a scale that hasn't happened before in
Right.
Vermont. And,
In terms of magnitude and numbers.
yeah,
you're talking
yeah,
about,
and,
Right.
so it's gonna be,
Which gets back to that number I quoted right back at the beginning.
right,
Right? The difference
Right.
between 355 million and whatever it's valued at for the whole state now indicates the amount of investment that we may have located in a fairly precarious spot.
yeah, yeah.
Sounds like an economic development program to me.
All right, the last one.
We had one more bullet point,
Right.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of jobs.
revision of
We kind of
future.
talked about the lot.
We already talked about the last one.
As we went
yeah.
through.
So obviously, I mean, it's obvious to me, I hope it is to everybody else. We're not going to be talking about rethinking Brattleboro's commercial districts tonight. I'm sorry to anybody who came